Now, for this evening, as usual, one day I'm sitting at the reference desk, and here comes Troy. And he says, hey, I've got a program for you. And I say, great, what and when? And we know that Troy loves to do research on the history of Council Bluffs and to share it with us in the community. We've enjoyed several of his programs here at the library. Troy is a teacher with the Lewis Central School District and a member of the Historical Society of Potawatomi. And tonight he's going to take us back in time to the early 1800s when travelers used the rivers as their interstate system. And here's Troy. Turn it over.
Okay. Hi. And okay. All right. Hi, my name is Troy Stolp. I am a graduate of Lewis Central from 1990, 94 graduate of Iowa State in anthropology and religious studies. And also, yes.
We're on the wrong screen.
Oh, that's right. A bachelor's in history from, that's okay, we'll just leave it. A bachelor's in history from BBU and a master's in history from UNO. And before we get started, I'd like to say I give these talks because there are so many aspects of Council Bluffs history that I feel are overlooked. Local history is not taught in the schools here. As far as Council Bluffs, regional at best. Also, the history that is highlighted in this area has mostly to do with General Grenville Dodge and also the Squirrel Cage Jail. And there's so much more unique history about Council Bluffs that I like to highlight. I don't go very much into old buildings and that sort of thing. I like to deal with the people that were here and the interactions that they had, especially in meeting of cultures, which we had here a lot. And a little background on tonight's presentation, the priest in the Potawatomi, is that I will be referring to Council Bluffs. In the time frame that I'm talking about, 1837 to 1847, roughly, there was not a town known as Council Bluffs. There was not a settlement in this area. It was, for the most part, during that 10-year span of time, a number of trading posts that we'll talk about a little bit, and really no settled communities. There were a couple of camps, and that was roughly it. And so when I refer to Council Bluff or Council Bluffs, I'm talking about the designation that most everyone in the United States had concerning the area, the geographic area between what's now Plattsmouth, or the mouth of the Platte River, which was a big thing because it was really a stopping point for people traveling upriver to the west of the country, which was the Louisiana Purchase at the time. And so between Plattsmouth and what's now Fort Calhoun at the time was Fort Atkinson, which was in existence at the Fort Calhoun area between 1819 and 1827. So when I talk about Council Bluffs, that's what I'm referring to, the whole area on either side of the river and the river valley. In addition, when I talk about the Potawatomi, it's important to know that the Potawatomi at the time were actually three tribes in one: the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. As a matter of fact, you will see how I will go ahead and describe how they became to really be three tribes in one and how they got to be the namesake for our county. Okay, so first of all, Lewis and Clark came up here in 1804. And of course, in the Council Bluffs area, there was White Catfish Camp. It's important to know also that Council Bluff is named after the actual place where Lewis and Clark met with the chiefs of the Oto in Missouri, which was not here. That's a common mistake that I hear people make because we have the Lewis and Clark Monument. That's just a monument to the Lewis and Clark expedition. The actual meeting place took place right where Fort Calhoun and the rebuilt Fort Atkinson Historical Monument are at. And this is a picture of the actual monument up by Fort Calhoun. So we will go next. Okay, And just to talk a little bit about what was going on in the River Valley, as I said, at this time we had Fontenelle. There was a forest in the Fontenelle area and a trading post, which was run by Peter Sarpy and Logan Fontenelle, and the remains are still there actually. And then up here, you see Caban's trading post on the side. We have Fort Atkinson up here, which is where Fort Calhoun is. And then you have Fort Lisa, and those were the early fur traders that were in the area. What you don't see on this map is right about here in the Council Bluffs area, there was a person by the name of Big Heart who had a trading post. And the first actual settler in this area that eventually lived in this town, and whose grave is just up the hill here, and his name is Francis Guitar. And he arrived in 1824 and had a trading post by what is now Big Lake. Okay, so how did the Potawatomi get here? We're going to go back a little bit to the War of 1812. As the United States and the British fought their second battle in the Revolutionary, after the Revolutionary War, and we'll stop there as I talk about that a little bit. Natives were pushed from the west, from the east coast to the west. And you had all of these tribes suddenly squeezed together. And you had people like William Caldwell Sr., who was a British Army officer who was Irish, and he married a Mohican woman, and they had a child by the name of Billy Caldwell. And William Caldwell Sr. fought in the War of 1812. Young Billy Caldwell grew up around people like Tecumseh and his father, William Caldwell, and they fought actually for the British. They were afraid of this new American threat, and the British, of course, would talk to them about how the Americans were just going to wipe out the natives, while the British wanted to work with the natives. And of course, the French had already been kicked out and in the 7 Years' War. So now the natives have met three types of people that were new to the continent. And their best friends had already left in the French, and the British now were fighting the Americans, and they were afraid that they were going to be left with the Americans. So Tecumseh had this grand idea, even during the War of 1812, that he would form this grand native, pan-native confederacy to fight off and repel the Americans. Well, that didn't happen. And they lost the War of 1812, and Tecumseh, all the while being very influential on the person, what they call a Métis, which is what they call the half-breed. Of course, Billy Caldwell was half Mohawk and half British, and his native name, Sauganash, actually means, and this is funny, this is the funniest thing to me, it means Englishman. So he actually has to be called Englishman in the native language. So there's a lot of fun there. Okay, so in 1832, Tecumseh died, and Billy Caldwell realized that pretty soon the British were going to leave, and that the whole idea of repelling the American settlers was a lost cause. So he decided that he was going to ride the wave. He was British educated. He spoke several different native languages. He spoke French. He spoke Spanish. He was very well educated, and he was someone the American government liked to deal with. So they named him, and it was accepted by the Potawatomi in 1833, as the chief of the three tribes in the Chicago area, the Treaty of Chicago. He was named the chief of the three tribes, the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. And pretty soon, all three tribes intermingled and began calling each other Potawatomi. And they thought they belonged to the three great fires, and that was their group. Okay, now this map is from 1851, 1852, and it shows a lot of the places here in Council Bluffs, and here in the area of interest. You have Traders Point right here, which was really for the Mormons to transmit their goods, and then they would cross over to Sarpy's Ferry to the Fontenelle Forest area, and there was a trail there. You had Council Point, which was a fur trading camp. And at this camp, fur trappers would come from lots of different nationalities, would come and leave their wives and their children and head up into the Rocky Mountains to trap fur. And they spoke probably 30 different languages in this camp. I mean, talk about your metro area, your cosmopolitan area. It was in this dusty little camp here in what would become Southwest Iowa. Fascinating. Also up here you see Hart's Trapping Station. I mentioned him before. That was him and Francis Guitar were the first people on this side of the river to actually have a fur trading, or to actually have a trading station. You'll notice the old blockhouse. Keep that in mind. Caldwell's Village. Keep that in mind. The Camp of Mormon Battalion, we won't be talking about them because they happen to show up after the Potawatomi. So we will move on. And just to let you know, this area roughly, for people who are familiar with Council Bluffs, is roughly between, right by where the Mormon Tabernacle is, and right about where the hospital sort of influence is downtown, just past downtown up towards the hospitals, right around Broadway. So let me go to the next. Okay. Billy Caldwell, oddly enough, is not very well known nationally, even though he rubbed noses with national historic figures that a lot of us know today. I mentioned Tecumseh, and he was well known with Tecumseh, well known in the Great Lakes region, which, by the way, is where the Potawatomi were originally from. I'll show you a map here shortly. In the Wisconsin area, Billy Caldwell, after the War of 1812, as I said, began marketing himself. He even had a hotel in Chicago. He had a street named after him. If you go to the Wisconsin area and the Chicago area, there's all sorts of stuff named after Billy Caldwell. And here we are in Council Bluffs, and probably 12 people tops know the name Billy Caldwell. So, and he was one of the most influential people in this area. So let's go to the next one. Okay, here is a picture, and I love these things. This is why I love this picture. This is Brock. This person is Tecumseh, and right here is Billy Caldwell. And he's talking to the British here. And Billy Caldwell was the commander of the Caldwell Rangers. This is right before the Blackhawk War of 1832. And it was roughly right after that that the British said, see you, we're done. This is from Wisconsin. This is really where the Potawatomi originated from, and where they were when the United States met them, first found them. And this is a Potawatomi carving celebrating the tribe. So you can see that at one time, in their actual homeland where they originated, where they lived at one point, they're celebrated a great deal, much more than they are here. I mean, sure, they have a county name, but that's really roughly what they've got in this area. So we will continue here. Okay, this is a map from 1818. And just to remind everybody what was going on in the country at the time, I really like to talk about how our microhistory fits into the macro history. I think it's really important for people to understand, gee, well, just like I did when I was a kid, how did we get to be Potawatomi County? Nobody ever had an answer for me. Well, there were some Indians. Okay, but what does that mean? I didn't know, so I had to learn on my own. And this is what I learned. So you have this map here of 1818. This is roughly, this is where Iowa is. This is the Missouri River right here. So here's Iowa. Right about here is where Council Bluffs is now. So you can see that all of this land here that was part of the Louisiana Purchase is now open. It's not a territory yet, technically, doesn't have a territorial governor. It's just this big block of land that's really kind of undiscovered and unknown by the fledgling United States. In addition to that, the United States was really kind of a broke country because it had just fought 2 wars against the British. And there were all sorts of natives living out here free. Free, I tell you. Not for long. This is one of the quotes that I found that is wonderful. It's a letter from Billy Caldwell to the British Army stationed in Canada, because of course they weren't in the the area for the United States anymore. And you can see that he's really kind of saying, yeah, thanks for making us promises that you couldn't keep, Britain. He's kind of sticking it to him. And this shows his mindset at the time, where I can't fight the United States, I can't fight American settlers coming in anymore if you guys aren't going to help. So this shows you what his mindset before he became, I like to think of him as the commercial Billy Caldwell, because he did a great job of selling himself for the rest of his life. And he parlayed his way into being the point man for the U.S. government for 3 whole tribes. And he fought against them in the War of 1812. Now, how do you like that happens? All right, so then 1830 happened. Oh, that's a watershed event for Native Americans in this country. This is Andrew Jackson's speech to Congress to convince them to pass the 1830 Indian Removal Act. It's no surprise that Andrew Jackson had his issues with Native Americans and was kind of a crab to begin with. And he was getting older, and so he ran this through. I don't expect you to read all this, but there's lots of racist language in here, which was prevalent at the time in the U.S. government. Not that it's not prevalent now, it's just people don't talk about it so much and they don't put it in the speech to Congress. But lots of racist language in here. Whites only. We can't have red living around here. What is that about? Colors can't mix. So anyway, but in reality, the funny thing is reality on the plains, out here on the plains and wherever you found Native Americans and any group of people, ethnicity get together, the colors mix. That's what people do. All right, so this is a lovely document. That's actually the congressional document of the 1830 Indian Relocation Act. This is codified. So again, I don't expect you to read the whole thing, but it's there on government documents. I love that website. Anyway, government documents, I could be there all day. And I was, a couple of times. Okay, so here we go. So because of that, and because the most prolific Chief Justice in the Supreme Court ever, guy by the name of John Marshall, made 3 Supreme Court decisions in which he said this: the Aboriginal land claims, they had rights to their own land claims, that tribes had sovereignty, Native American tribes had sovereignty, and that they would have a federal trust, and the federal government was responsible for that federal trust. Now, those all sound like great things. You're saying, oh wow, the natives get to decide what they get to do, and the federal government has to protect it. Well, that gives the federal government power. And so they were able to use it. So the 1830 Indian Removal Act allowed the federal government to say, hey, we don't want you here anymore. Get out. So they decided to have the Potawatomi, which are up here, and split them up into a couple different bands. And the first place they went is, you can follow the arrow down here, And that is the Platte Purchase. This is the area in northwest Missouri that always gets hit by tornadoes in every snowstorm imaginable. I would never live there. And so, of course, I don't know if the tornado season was the same as it is now, but I often wonder if they were sent to the Platte Purchase area to be caught by a twister. I'm not sure. But anyway, they were sent down here first, and things didn't go so well. Oh, and another band was sent here, the Kickapoo, the other half were sent here. They were cousins. They were genetically related, of course, and again, 3 tribes into one. Half went here, half went to the Platte Purchase. All this was nothing. It wasn't civilized, so to speak. It was prairie, it was frontier. So it was anywhere where the United States government wanted to put them. Okay. Okay, so this is actually a wonderful piece of history that talks about the, oh, and by the way, at this point in time, the person in charge of the territory of Louisiana and everything inside of it was none other than William Clark of Lewis and Clark fame. So you'll see, I have several of these things that talk about, hey, General William Clark, he ran the whole show out here. So everybody had to report to him. In a lot of these documents, you will see a who's who of American generals, especially in this area. We have all sorts of names of these people, and then suddenly you see them talking, and that's kind of a cool thing. So anyway, I returned yesterday from among the Potawatomis. I was in Sacs, it means socks. You'll find a lot of misspellings in native tribe names and these things. To remove the Potawatomi to their own land, agreeable to the treaty. Part of the band, accompanied by their agent, Dr. James. Edwin James was the first Indian sub-agent who lived here. And the Indian sub-agency at the time was set at none other than Council Point. And that's actually in documentation. And it's funny how many, and I know I'm talking to very few people here in person, but even online, how many of you have ever heard of Council Point? The other historian in the room. That's great. Hardly anybody's heard of Council Point, and I've already described it as probably the most cosmopolitan place in this side of the Mississippi. I mean, forever. And yet nobody here has heard about it. And it was an Indian sub-agency. And it was right where Lake Manawa is now. Council Bluffs needs to do better about its own history. Okay, so and this is documented proof that they're going around, that their Potawatomi are coming here from, oh, and who's this from? Henry Atkinson, Brigadier General of the U.S. Army. Fort Atkinson in Fort Calhoun is named after this guy. He was the commandant, so to speak. Every time I think of commandant, I think of the Police Academy movies and the commandant. Anyway, so there is Henry Atkinson was the commandant for the post, and there he is. He's still running the show. He's a bigwig in the military right now, Brigadier General of the U.S. Army, sending his letter to William Clark. All right, so, okay, and here's another one. This is from William Clark to Stephen Kearny. Anybody hear of Kearny, Nebraska? Mm-hmm. This, again, once again, a bigwig in historical names around here, right here in our own area. He was actually here. Many of the day that I think, I stand where Stephen Kearny stood. I'm just kidding. One of the funny things about this is, you'll notice that Kearny is spelled differently. One of the issues in history a lot of times is names get changed. Kearny, Nebraska is spelled with an E, but his name's actually no E in the name. And it just stuck as EY. I don't know if that ever made him angry, but apparently he was okay. So anyway, so as a Potawatomi, you're now about to move to their new country. Your object will be to afford them protection from being molested by other Indians. I will tell you right now that for the entire duration of their stay in this area in what is now southwest Iowa, they were harassed by the Lakota. The Lakota were also under the same Indian Relocation Act. And it's interesting, the Lakota, now, if you look at what they have as their mythology, they arose out of the Rocky Mountains. They arose out of the Badlands. Well, they didn't. They were originally in Wisconsin. When the United States first encountered them, they were in Wisconsin, and they were sent packing west, just like everybody else was, from the Wisconsin Great Lakes area. So on their way, they found horses, and then they started attacking the Potawatomi. So it was a constant. And, okay, and this is important. This paragraph right here. I wish you to throw up a blockhouse of one story, about 25 feet square, at such place as may be eligible. That blockhouse was indeed built and became the first building in what is now Council Bluffs. The first building whatsoever, unless you count fur trapping, things, but it was the first permanent building. And then here it is again. Here's the second detachment of emigrating Potawatomis. About 75 of them arrived in their own company. Oh, and the steamboat Howard again, steamboat traffic, as Marla said, was the highway at the time. And one of the things you have to realize about the Missouri River at this point in time is that thing flooded every spring and every fall until the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers channelized that guy between 1935 and 1986. That's why it doesn't flood every year now, twice. So they found that a lot of these places that they would use for steamboat docks, one is pretty close to where the north tip of Lake Manawa is. And it was right about there was a steamboat dock. And in 1881, of course, the river shifted channels and left the lake there. That's how we have an old steamboat dock right on the lake. It's not there. There are no remains. It would be great if we could find some, but it's doubtful they're there. Because it was river bottom, and again, it flooded twice a year. So now you have everybody coming up by steamboat, and this was the way of things in 1837. Okay, I love this one because whoever this guy is, anybody hear of D.B. Moore in military history? No? I haven't either. This is the first place. And I wonder why. Here is kind of a snarky response to William Clark. I have the honor to inform you that in compliance with your order on the 21st of July, I love this, 21st of July, and this was actually written in late October. So 3 months later, he's responding in a crabby fashion to the guy who runs the whole territory. I love that. It's lovely. Anyway, he talks about the first dragoons, again, the spelling. I don't know what a dragoon is. I think I found one in college. At a point near Bellevue, on the east side of the Missouri River, right there on the 4th of August, and remained until the 1st of November 1st. I love it, and nobody is that detailed. Just to let you know, this General Clark, that I went there this day, I stayed this day, and then I did these things on this day, and then I came back. So I love that. That's one of my favorite all-time things. Okay. This is an excerpt. This is actually a letter to Charles Babbitt. Charles Babbitt is the first historian of Potawatomi County. He came to Council Bluffs because it was a town by 1855. He came here with his father, he grew up here, he became a historian. He saw the remains of the blockhouse. He talked to people who were here during the Potawatomi days, between 1837 and 1847. So he actually inquired of the government through the only mail there was at the time about those things. So this is just a long excerpt that they told him, here's what happened, here are the records we found. There's Camp Kearney. Records indicate that Captain D.B. Moore with company, and see he references that very letter I just talked to you about. Captain Kearney himself spent 12 days in the vicinity between April 12th to 24. And then he went up and down the Platte and cured the first dragoons, and they stayed at the blockhouse. So we will go on to the next one. Now, the blockhouse is interesting. This is because there are three different pictures of the blockhouse, and they show different buildings. And when you read Charles Babbitt's work from the early 1900s as the historian of Council Bluffs, there was a big to-do about the blockhouse because nobody had an accurate picture of it. So apparently this is not an accurate picture of the blockhouse, although it's included when you search up any search, even back then, about the blockhouse of Council Bluffs, this picture. And this picture. And this always looked like water to me, so I didn't know how that was supposed to happen since there are no oceans in Council Bluffs. Anyway, again, the location of the blockhouse is roughly First and Pierce Street. If anyone here or online remembers where Regal Lanes is in Council Bluffs, it was just to the east of that. And it's described by DeSmet here coming up. This is from a boulder that is there today. As you can see, it marks the site of the log blockhouse erected and stationed by the United States troops. And it was from 1838 to 1841. It's right there. The building was there a lot longer. As a matter of fact, Charles Babbitt talks about seeing the ruins of it and playing in it as a kid. And you know, when you're a kid, you don't realize the importance of some of these things that you're doing. So he talks about that in his book that I used to reference. Okay. These are two kids on the same boulder talking about these are my kids. Actually, I just found two other kids just to lend myself credibility. So two strange kids, and there's the boulder at the location marking the first building in Council Bluffs. This is the location. This picture was roughly 6 years ago. So you can see there's an apartment complex up there. And there's the road right next to it. There is the boulder right there with the engraving on it. So that's what it looks like today. This is while William Caldwell was leader of the Potawatomi that came here. And while he was here, he did a lot of things, such as build a mill. And he took the money, and by the way, William Caldwell, as I said, he kind of parlayed himself into a position of power and prominence among the Potawatomi. The thing is, they all loved him. His father fought against the British, or against the Americans for the British. So already he was a hero. William Caldwell fought in the Mohawk Wars in the 1830s. And so the fact that he was part of this, and the United States and his tribe loved him, and the United States loved him too, to the tune of he got extra money every year, $400 a year, just for being Billy Caldwell. So, you know, they don't come out and say, when you read the history, it doesn't come out and say, we put Billy in a position of power because we wanted to make things easier for us. We wanted to pacify the natives, of course. And what's $400 a year to Billy Caldwell? Well, it was great to Billy Caldwell because he could buy materials to build a mill on Mosquito Creek. And it just so happens, hold on, there are the remains of that mill. We think, as you can see, there's this nice bridge over there, and nobody's willing to tear that bridge down to get to the remains of the grist mill that are right here. You can see the brick there. The Nonpareil did a story about a year and a half ago, 2 years, 3 years ago. Okay, that just means So anyway, it's there. You can go down to the creek. You can go down by the bridge, and if you go down there, anybody can go down and see the remains of the mill from 1840 built by none other than William Caldwell and friends. I imagine he didn't do it by himself. Okay, in comes Father Jean DeSmet. Father Jean DeSmet was in a group of 6 guys from Belgium. And they were teenagers in 1821 and decided to hop on a boat. They were going to run away from Belgium, hop on a boat, and go talk about Jesus in the United States. Well, they came to the United States, and they went to what was really community college for Jesuit missionaries at the time in the New World. And then they got themselves assignments. One of the first assignments for the person known as Father Jean DeSmet was the Potawatomi. And so he came up here, he was sent up here, he had traveled, and this guy is a large man. I don't know what he ate, but he lived a lot out on the prairie, but apparently he ate more than other people. Because he's always described in the history books as corpulent. I don't know how big you have to be described as corpulent, but I know that he was described that way. And he was always barefoot. He was always talking about, man, my feet are cold. I don't know why Jesuit missionaries can't buy shoes. Anyway, they couldn't. So anyway, this is, he's got one of the things about Father Jean DeSmet is he was almost like an anthropologist among the Potawatomi. And he traveled up and down the Missouri. He stayed with the Potawatomi about 2 years, the entire time he was here. And he was, from all accounts, a genuine, warm, caring person who thought that he was doing God's work by getting the native out of these natives. He was trying to replace their own religion with his, and that's the paradox of all this. He was trying to convince these people to give up their own religion and say that their ways were bad and evil, and they would accept his. But he did it because he did love them, and he did genuinely care about them. It's evident in his speech. He kept great journals and wrote lots of letters as he traveled up and down Missouri, usually without shoes, in the middle of winter. I don't know how he did it, because I don't think I could keep up, especially for a person of his age. He kept up a very demanding schedule. Okay, and here you can see as he passed up the Sauk country, it's spelled right, so you know that the earlier misspelling was a misspelling. And this is great. More than a quarter mile presented nothing but groups of savages. This is so great. Nothing but groups of savages, warriors, women, and children. So he's on the steamboat. And he's traveling up the Missouri, and he's talking about, and he's happy, and it's a new place, a new job, and he's going to his new job, and he sees natives on the side of the river, and they're waving at him. And you've all been there. Everybody's been on a bus in high school or somewhere where they see people on the side of the road, and they're waving, and I love it. He says, curiosity to see the steamboat pass had no doubt attracted them to the bank. The chiefs who knew Father Barrett, who was the guy before him who had died, and Brother Mazzelli, they went with him to the Potawatomi country. So now you can say it's Potawatomi country, not county yet, but Potawatomi country, because they live there. Anyway, they saluted us in a most affectionate manner. Now I know how many of you have been on a bus and there are people outside and they're saluting you in the most affectionate manner. I'm guessing they gave the Native American version of the middle finger. That's just my thoughts. So I always love this particular excerpt from his diaries. Okay, and here, this is great because, again, this is real history we're talking about here. Father DeSmet does a great job of describing the trip up on the steamboat. I mean, yes, you have the Lewis and Clark journals, and that's great. They talk about in the P Road, but this is on an actual steamboat. So it gives you, it dates it to some degree. with the exception of the snags, which raped and scraped us now and then, and the sandbars, which opposed our passage, which had to be crossed at all hazards, our journey was picturesque enough. The boat has to be lifted, or he's on a steamboat, and they have to stop and lift the steamboat over the sandbar. I mean, everybody here has had to push a car, right? I mean, to lift a steamboat over a sandbar, that would happen to me every 12 minutes, I'm sure. Two heavy timbers are set in the water in the front, and the boat made fast to them. The engine then is started at full speed, and by means of close, it lifts the stern and shoves the boat forward a yard or 2 or 3. And the same thing is done over and over again. Sometimes it took the whole day. And I get mad in traffic when it takes me 20 minutes to get to Westbrook. All right. Okay, this is another piece of fascinating topic about this. The Devil's Rake, which had to be passed through, swallowed up by the Men's River, gigantic trees thrashing in the water, throwing up foam. If anybody has been around the river, the Missouri River, to any degree, this is not a surprise. But the fact that you have to go through it on a steamboat and you really can't get off. The water of the Missouri was our only drink. All right, how many people here would love to have a fresh glass of Missouri River water right now? Okay. And then throw in fleas, mosquitoes, and other insects who are our traveling companions. Still, everyone spoke of the beautiful voyage we had made. I feared the sea. He's saying, I fear the sea. And yet, all the storms on the ocean were never as bad as this trip up the river on a steamboat. So much terror. So much terror. Okay. So the next is, here's where we arrive. Okay, now Father DeSmet was told that he should expect upon his arrival on the dock that's right now the northern part of Lake Manawa. Right, that's right there. That was the boat he was. That was the dock he was dropped off on, and he was told to expect 500 screaming fans in essence. So he was supposed to be a Jesus rock star, and among the Potawatomi, and they were going to love him, and it was going to be wonderful. And so he says, nearly 2,000 savages in their finest rigs, and they were fully painted in all sorts of patterns. And he says, I've never seen a finer looking people than these Potawatomi. Never seen them, nothing compared to these. Father Barrett and Brother Mazzelli went at once to the camp of the half-breed children. Again, Métis, half-breed children. We were far, and then he says, we were far from finding here the 400 or 500 fervent Catholics we had been told to expect. Of the 2,000 Potawatomis who were there, not a single one seemed to even know who I was. So here he makes this journey and he thinks, man, this is my first gig. I'm in charge and they're going to love me. And they walk by him, and if you read the rest of it, they went there so they could get booze. The natives turned up so they could pick up their shipment of booze that the traders the government sent as part of their provisions that they were promised were sent up the river, and they took them booze. So here he is coming out, I'm here to save all of you, my God's children, and they don't care one little bit. They're there for the whiskey. So this is, it just certainly would happen to me. Okay. Anyway, they were up on the 31st of May. Looks like I got the same one, sorry. Okay. And here's where he talks about Stephen Carney. When he was talking to Billy Caldwell, he was an old man by now, and he was still in charge of the Potawatomis, and he was raking in the dough. If there was such a thing as a wealthy guy on the Potawatomi reservation, it was Billy Caldwell. And so he's up here and he's talking to Billy Caldwell, and Caldwell says, hey, you know what? The United States troops have left. Maybe you want to take over their blockhouse, because apparently there were a series of 4 buildings, and it would have been perfect for a mission. And so he talked to Stephen Carney, and Stephen Carney said, yeah, you can have it. We don't care. We're not there anymore. Okay. So And that's what he talks about. And here he is describing his days. I employed my days in instructing children. I've already baptized, and that was a big deal. They measured success, missionaries measured success in Christian baptisms and weddings and all those sorts of things to show that they are bringing Jesus to the savages, so to speak. So, and oh wait, look, any great number of these savages. So even a guy who loves the Potawatomi and has already described in detail how wonderful they are and how beautiful they are to behold, these savages. Okay. So, and oh yeah, and for since the arrival of the steamboat, which brought a large quantity of liquor, they are quarreling and fighting from morning till night. This is important because this is the reason the Potawatomi were removed. Jean DeSmet loved these people, and it's evident in everything he wrote. And yet, in everything he writes, there's a caveat. Large quantity of liquor. They are quarreling and fighting from morning till night. When they sober, the most perfect harmony prevails throughout their whole years, often pass without quarrels. They are not at all addicted to pernicious practice of slander. And I started this cut off, and it said they don't slander about people. They don't gossip when they're sober. But the booze that kept flowing into the reservation by unscrupulous traders, as DeSmet talked about. And here is proof of this is the St. Joseph Mission, or they often called it St. Mary's Mission, at the location of the old blockhouse. We have a fine little chapel, 24 feet square. It's mounted by a little belfry, 4 poor little cabins made of rough logs. They're 14 feet each way with roofs of rude rafters which protect us from neither rain nor hail, and still less from the snow of winter. So everything here is camping. Everything on this reservation, even up until 1838, is camping, even in the blockhouse. Okay, and this is a boulder on the other side of the street, and this commemorates the Jesuit mission by Father Pierre-Jean DeSmet. And it just says, hey, he was here until 1940, and this building was great, and we loved him, and we're going to dedicate this boulder in this obscure apartment complex. Way to go, Council Bluffs. Way to go. All right, here's this. Hey, look at this kid. He looks like he's about ready to give me the great salute that the natives on the side of the river were going to give to Jean DeSmet. Anyway, these two guys are not happy that Dad brought them to the historic places they cared nothing about. Anyway, this is the boulder that talks about DeSmet's mission. Okay, now I spoke about the liquor. I'm not going to read all of these to you, but this is from DeSmet's journal. Each one is an entry into his diary about murder, about swindling, about violence by men, women, and children. There's some drownings in there. It basically describes the natives getting drunk, killing each other. 2 Potawatomis killed on the Shea River, and that's whoever he wrote this, and we don't know what he meant by Shea River, but they drunk and frolic. 3 more drowned in Missouri drunk. Potawatomi poisoned on Mosquito Creek while drunk. I don't know how you get drunk and get poisoned. I don't hear that very much anymore in the police blotter, and I hope not. But you can see that all of these things, War Party 3 Sox discovered 3 lodges of these people, thought they were Potawatomi, so they killed them. I mean, that's never good news. Here's the second page. Drunken Potawatomi killed the Sox. The murderer, after the perpetration of the deed was mortally stabbed by his own father-in-law. Things like that. Let's see, there's one here where the mother and the father were both drunk, and they took the child, and the father took the child and beat him against the post of the house while they were drunk. Talking about kids drinking, drinking all day. I hope he means the natives. I don't know if DeSmet was drinking all day. Drunkards by the dozens, Indians selling horses, blankets, guns, after all, they have a lack of the cannon. In this time, cannon meant a quantity of alcohol. So you might think it's military, but it's not. It's alcohol. So when they talk about cannons, so when you read cannons here, and then there's an accident, a severe scalding. He drew his knife, an IOA drew his knife to stab a companion. Another friend at the ceremony poured the aggressor's head over the aggressor's head a kettle of boiling soup. So, again, lots of drinking, lots of violence. And this certainly bothered DeSmet. When I first researched this, I had a primary document of DeSmet in which he wrote to Congress to ask them to stop whatever they could do to stop sending alcohol upriver and to save the Potawatomi. And he wrote to somebody else and he never received a reply. And of course, because drunken natives are easier to control. We're going to go to this one and one more. Again, here you have Indian sub-agents coming by, trying to stop things. Company of dragoons from Fort Leavenworth arrived at Bellevue with Omaha women. And this is when more whiskey landed. Arrival of the Antelope. Anytime you see one of these, he italicizes the name of the steamboat. So whenever you see an italicized word, that's the name of a steamboat coming up with booze. So arrival of the St. Peter's, more booze with the annuities. And see, that's what they would get annuities, and they would spend it all on the alcohol. And the government, who was in charge of what was on these steamboats, they would tell the proprietors, hey, here's what you need to send up. So they would send up the booze. So the annuities of $90,000 split by roughly the 2,000 Potawatomi that were here, a lot of it was spent on booze. And it was just bad news. Okay, while Father Jean DeSmet was here, he drew a map. The first map, the earliest map of the area. This is the Missouri River here. As you can see, it's not the same Missouri as it was a while ago. Right here is Caldwell's Camp. That is the location that, of course, Billy Caldwell, since he was chief of the tribe. This, again, is up by the blockhouse, would have been right here. And that area was up by where Blimpie's is today, on Broadway, and also the Mormon Tabernacle is there. So knowing that this is East Broadway, then you can kind of get a feel for the rest of it. Here's St. Joseph's Mission. Okay, so here's the blockhouse. And I know I'm out of the picture right now. But over in this area is roughly where Lewis Central is right now. So, and you can see the Strawberry Bluffs. I love how they have a space in between strawberries at the time. I love linguistic evolution. And so you can see kind of how different it is. But that is the first map. Here is a kind of a better map of it, I think. It's kind of updated and it shows a lot less of so this is the second version. And again, this is Caldwell's Camp here. This is roughly where Lewis Central is now. And so you can see, like right here, there's no Lake Manawa yet. And you can see this, if you could read these, if they were just a little bit more clear, you could see that that's where the steamboat landing was. And again, this is 1839. Okay, and this is again, this is the end of the mission. Father G. DeSmet stayed until he had an emergency assignment upriver to the Flathead natives, and he took that upriver, and while he was there, he volunteered to go to another native tribe because he had really just become exhausted with the whole drinking and killing that was going on here. So he was really tired of that. So we wanted to find out, just as proof, when the mission closed. And so Charles Babbitt, I love his name, Charles Babbitt. Charles Babbitt, dear sir, to answer your inquiry relative to the Jesuit Potawatomi mission at Council Bluffs, I am able to inform you that the last resident missionary departed from the place in August 1841. So that's when the building was last used. Oh, the last entry is July 17th, so apparently they left before that. And it's nice they didn't tell anyone they were leaving until after they had gone. I think that's what the difference between the dates indicates. Hey, we're gone. Sorry, you can't talk us out of it. So that's sort of the beginning of the end for the Potawatomi, is when the mission closed. Oh, that is Chief Saganosh's grave, or Englishman, if you will, Billy Caldwell's grave, which is in the St. Joseph Cemetery right here in Council Bluffs. That's obviously an old picture. They actually have replaced the headstone. Okay, this is a report from the Indian sub-agent about the Potawatomi, and he's talking about, well, the Jesuits left because of booze and fighting. And he's talking about, and then this is important. He's talking about the Potawatomi and the booze and the fighting, and then he says, the Potawatomis will soon be exposed to a frontier of whites on the east, which will, in all probability, like that of Missouri on the south, contain many individuals who will devote themselves by illicit traffic to the destruction of the red race. While their acts of cruel fraud, meanness, and plunder will disgrace our own, the state of things will constitute another strong reason for the removal of these Indians to the better home. So, instead of being a protector, as John Marshall, U.S. Supreme Court Justice, talked about, they're saying, we can't protect them from these settlers, and we're certainly not going to tell the settlers that they can't come here. So we're going to prepare you to move the Potawatomi out yet again, because that was the way of doing things. This, and again, apparently, this is a map of Iowa in 1846. This makes me laugh because it makes me think that a lot of people in Minnesota were also corpulent, the way that it's crunching down on the top of Iowa. Anyway, so you can see that Iowa, this is roughly where the border is right now. Anyway, so this is Iowa, and it became a state in 1846. What a surprise that the United States government made a treaty with the Potawatomi County, or with the Potawatomi natives in 1846, saying, dudes, you gotta go. Sorry, I know we said this is where you gotta go 10 years ago, but, things change. People change. Things change. Anyway, so they said, really, and it was a good idea at the time, because the Potawatomi were, again, just drunk all the time and murdering each other all the time. Their cousins that I told you about that went to Kansas, they didn't have that problem because they were not on the Missouri River, and steamboat traders couldn't come up the river with cannons of booze. So, 1846, the treaty was signed. And here is the report to the Indian subcommissioner is talking about his report, saying most of the natives didn't have to. We gave them 2 years to leave, and guess what? They decided to leave anyway, early, because things were so bad. They were so bad here that they said, look, we'd rather get out. We just want to get out. And so they did. And this was in 1847. Can't remember. And this is a picture of Council Bluffs in 1849, after the Potawatomi left. And this is right when, this brings us to the end of our story. This is the same time that the Mormons, right after the Potawatomi left, and it's a whole other presentation, but the Mormons came in. So this is what, roughly at the time that the Potawatomi left, this is what Council Bluffs looked like. It still wasn't Council Bluffs, it was Canesville at this time. As of 1846, it was Canesville. But the Potawatomi are all gone at this point, leaving their legacy. It was such a great legacy that it takes historians to have to find out for themselves what that legacy actually was. It's not presented publicly, usually. And with that, that is the end of the presentation. And I will give it back to Marlis.
Okay, let's see. Oh, nobody's asked any questions.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, guys.
If anybody has any questions about the Potawatomi or, well, really anything, I don't think I left my iron on if that's one of your questions.
Okay, you're in the room. Any questions?
Anybody here want to ask a question? Yes. Oh.
I know when you were mentioning the spelling differences, I noticed that the word Potawatomi itself has been spelled many times different ways between our state and Kansas and who knows wherever, the spelling, I noticed it. No, that's one issue. But the other issue, the more important one was, okay, so I've never known the Native Americans to, as far as I know, never fermented their own beverages to make alcohol. So basically what you're really saying is the only source of alcohol was the white man basically brought the natives the alcohol. Because they never fermented their own.
And you have to remember, and this is our whole country does this. Everybody says the term Native American, and you're talking about thousands of cultures, different groups, genetically, physiologically, and ethnically. So, but you're right, the vast majority did not ferment their own beverages. They had other items that were used in place as hallucinogens. And so no, and there were actually, for Native Americans, there were two liquids that Europeans and Americans brought that caused a lot of heartache, and it was alcohol and milk, because the vast majority of Native Americans were lactose intolerant because there were not cows, sheep, or pigs on this continent. Even horses were extinct from this continent until Europeans brought them back, reintroduced them. Okay. Any other questions?
Okay, so these Potawatomi that came from Chicago, what was their culture? What was their known entity? I mean, Lakota was warrior-like. Ojibwa were farmers. What was yeah, they got messed up when they got here, but what was their heritage?
Well, and again, one of the things you have to remember is that all of the tribes, especially the ones I talked about, the three you just mentioned, were in a state of flux, and especially those in the Great Lakes area, because all of them had influxes of lots of different tribes. As settlers moved west and natives were forced out, it was chaos everywhere else. Everywhere past the frontier of the United States was pure chaos, because you had traditional systems breaking down, you had members of tribes meeting and going together, reforming. I hate to use a war analogy, when you have people going into war and things get messed up. Of course, in every war, their plans get fouled up, especially in an attack situation. So, and I think of D-Day, where soldiers from all these different companies and divisions were all messed up, and they eventually ended up in totally different units. That's what happened on the frontier. That's what happened with the Potawatomi. So if you want to go back to what their traditional way of life was, you actually have to go back prior to the War of 1812, because it was, it's funny, we in the era of COVID, we talk a lot about the apocalypse and how things have changed, and Judgment Day and that sort of thing. And especially in Christian ideology, you talk about Judgment Day. Judgment Day was every day for Native Americans at that period of time on the frontier, because every day was unlike anything they had ever lived through before. So you had this conglomeration, just like you have this conglomeration of Native Americans coming together. You have a conglomeration of traditions, cultures, and religions going together as well. So the Potawatomi at the time were really all about survival. They believed in a great spirit. They had limited farming that they had learned from Americans and Europeans. And they, of course, had hunting. But again, every time more Americans came, they lost hunting ground. And that's one of the things Billy Caldwell knew, is that there was no way for them to sustain themselves.
They're essentially a generation detached from their
Yeah, so their way of life, you asked about their way of life, it was gone. It was already gone.
the refugees. They were
And when they brought them here, and when you read DeSmet's diaries and journals, he says these people sit around all day, and which was a common thought. But what they don't realize is that most of these people were brought up to hunt and work on their homes and provide for their families and themselves. They weren't brought up to be farmers, and if you weren't, in American culture, British, European culture, you weren't building a new house or moving out on the plains. It's just a different culture. It's just a different way of life. And that way of life was now gone. So most of them had no idea what to do.
We have a couple of questions from our virtual audience.
Sorry.
Why did the Potawatomi tribe get split between Oklahoma and Kansas?
Just because of sheer numbers. They wanted, as DeSmet talked about, he got there, the Potawatomi mission here, there were roughly 200 people. 2,000 people. And they wanted to keep numbers low. And especially early on in the reservation system, the U.S. government wanted to keep numbers low to keep them manageable. So that was the primary concern. They didn't want 30,000, and there weren't that many Potawatomi anyway, but they certainly didn't want 5,000 in one group discovering, hey, we hate reservation life, we're getting out of here, and then getting a hold of some guns. That's the last thing they wanted. And remember, the U.S. Army at the time was barely anything. There was not a standing army in the United States at the time. It was militia. Again, when a need arose, they formed militias. And then they trained an army, and that would take several months to get a standing army together to fight a war. So they certainly didn't want Native Americans joining. And the government was also almost broke at the time because they had just fought the Revolution and they just fought the War of 1812. And of course, the Black Hawk War. Go ahead.
Okay, another question.
Yes.
A portion of the Potawatomi tribe settled near present-day Atlantic, Iowa. Did they have the same problems with alcohol and fighting as those right along the Missouri?
And certainly my research is focused mainly on the Potawatomi, and I never know where to look in this thing. Okay, I should look at the camera. So I can tell you that they did not. There is a few mentions in the research or in the historiography of the group out in Atlantic, and they weren't near a major river that brought up cannons of booze. So they certainly didn't have that sort of issue. Now, what I do know is that eventually they did head to Kansas, and then really not long after that, a couple of years, I think 5 years, within 5 years, they were gone from there as well, sent somewhere else.
Okay, so you told us that Billy Caldwell became the famed Native American of the Pot County related, Potawatomi Indians related to the United States government. How did the Pot Indians look at Billy?
They loved him.
They did.
They loved him. Even they saw that he was, I mean, they had to know that he was getting extra money. They had to know he lived in a better place than they did, but they thought he was the chief. And because he fought against the Americans, that was a really big deal. That he fought against the Americans twice. And he only decided to give in when it was apparent that there was nothing that could be done. In Native American communities, and it varied from tribe to tribe, and you can see this in history, Native American reaction to the American arrival varied in lots of degrees to compliance and capitulation to the American way of life and giving up their old native ways, so to speak, to violent rebellion. So, and in this case, Billy Caldwell, again, he was half British and half Mohawk, and he was the chief of the Potawatomi tribe. They accepted him because they loved him. They knew him forever in the in the area in the Great Lakes region among the Potawatomi, the Ojibwa, and the Ottawa, and he fought against the Americans. And so they loved him.
Okay. So Father DeSmet arrives and he's, going to convert everybody to Christianity. Did Father DeSmet know Potawatomi or whatever language they spoke? Or was Billy the translator? Or how did that all work?
Well, and they did have translators, and when he first got here, he did not know the language, but he eventually did. And it was Siouan dialect, what's called a Siouan dialect. And it proved useful for him because, again, Jean DeSmet, this is one of the things about Council Bluffs that just drives me crazy. Jean DeSmet is a famous missionary. He went all over the country. He even made it out to the Pacific coast. He was in Oregon for a time. He was well loved everywhere he went. And, oh yeah, by the way, he finally did get shoes. One of the stories, I got to tell this story. He was waiting while he was here at St. Joseph's Mission. And everybody was waiting over by where Manawa is, waiting for the steamboat to come in. And they hit a snag during a storm, and the steamboat went down. And so did Father DeSmet's shoes. He actually had ordered shoes, and the shoes went down on the steamboat. So I had to talk about that. And in the description of it, he used this word, it's nugatory, and it's spelled Nugatory. And when I first researched it, I thought it was nugatory because I didn't know the word. And I thought, is this where McDonald's chicken nuggets go when they haven't been redeemed yet? I wasn't sure. So, but it's nugatory. And I just saw it again the other night, and it was so much fun to read. Anyway, the shoes on that boat were nugatory because the word means insignificant.
Any other questions? Oh, go ahead.
Not to drag this subject back constantly over and over, but back to the alcohol thing. Is it your belief that the introduction of the alcohol, was that as a trading bargain to get to trade in order for capitalist trading going on among the Native Americans, or is it more of a ploy by the white settlers in order to continue a subtle genocidal policy?
Well, I do believe, and if you read the United Nations definition of genocide, which is the destruction of culture by whatever means, that took place in the United States. I will say that probably the traders weren't doing it. It was probably planned by people higher up in the government. You saw that you saw the letter from Andrew Jackson, and he was a big proponent of getting Native Americans out so Americans could go in. And he used, it wasn't even couched in racist terms. It was just flat out racist. It was just saying, we don't want the red men here. And look, we'll bring them culture. They need us. They love us. They'll love us. And if they don't, they'll die. And that's really what happened. So I think that the alcohol, as a matter of fact, you know it is because it's well documented. I didn't provide much of it in this case because DeSmet didn't talk about it, but alcohol was used as a tool to get natives away. And if they're pacified through alcohol, they're less likely to revolt on a reservation. So the brutal truth is it was a tool used by the United States government for their own purposes.
At $4 to $5 a bottle as well.
To $4 to $5 a bottle. Unless you can swim out and get one that floated off onto the sunken steamboats, which was, I'm sure, a thing.
So tornadoes, alcohol, whatever works. Sadly, very sadly. Any last questions for Troy? Well, I want to thank you, Troy, for being here tonight. I want to thank you here in the audience for being here, as well as all of you listeners at home. And I wish you well and have a good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.